On June 27th, 1969, the police would raid the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar and safe haven for queer people located in New York. This sparked a unique and beautiful demonstration lasting over the course of 6 days and creating conversations around LGBTQ+ existence and starting the fight towards the decriminalization of queer life and visibility. The patrons of the Stonewall Inn and the people they invited fought in the face of police, danger, and serious criminal charges. The world watched as activists pushed the borders of who it was acceptable to be. This is the Stonewall Uprising, the frontier of American queer rights. In America, around the mid-50s to late 60s, gay people were seen as ill, and there was quite the push to find a cure. Trans people had to argue that they weren't a danger to society and court, as seen in this 1964 New York Times article, "A transvestite gets legal help. Civil Liberties Union argues wearing garb of opposite sex is not criminal. Misuse of law charged." These laws went so far as to ban women from wearing any pants with any sort of fly zipper, including jeans. Gay men were portrayed as perverts, and lesbians were portrayed as nothing more than sex objects, only content for jokes and graphic over-sexualization. In general, the queer community was seen as awful and dangerous people, if they were even seen as people. Police raided gay and trans bars often, becoming brutal in their measures to arrest, like the raid in March of 1969 at the Dover Hotel in Los Angeles, which ended up killing an unarmed, non-violent man. Protests began to spark after these violent raids, like the protests at the Black Cat Bar in 1967 that was described as an abuse of dignity and rights by the protesters. But all of these were generally negative events with a lot of unwarranted violence. Stonewall was a little different. The first night. On June 28, 1969, around 1:30 a.m., the New York Police Department raided the Stonewall Inn on the basis that they were not authorized to have a liquor license. Stonewall Inn was a popular gay bar in New York described as Old Faithful. But it was apparent to the patrons of Stonewall that it was about more than a missing liquor license. The police reportedly told the patrons to get on the walls and then proceeded to call them slurs. Police forced people who were described as transvestites into bathrooms to examine their bodies. It got violent. There's an account of a woman hitting and kicking the police and then being hit in the head with a club. It only became more severe from there. Her fighting ignited the crowd's rage, and she allegedly yelled something along the lines of "Stop standing there and do something." Martin Boyce describes a beating from that night in David Carter's book Stonewall. You could hear flesh and bone against thin metal and moaning. The patrons were tired of being beat and the violence that was posed against them. Protesters started throwing pennies, then quarters, then bottles. The bottles drew blood from the police, and they started running into the crowd, but quickly retreated, realizing that patrons were stronger than they knew. The police barricaded themselves within the Stonewall, leaving no police on the street. The crowd erupted into celebration. Bottles and trash cans were thrown through windows, fires broke out within the Stonewall, and the police drew their guns. The patrons were hungry for their freedom. This event was described by Michael Fader, who was there that night, as the last straw. It was time to reclaim something that had always been taken from us. It was their visibility that had been taken. The group broke out into joy and celebration, even in the face of the police. Around sunrise, the streets were mostly clear, but it wasn't over. The following nights are often construed as violent and negative, but retellings and accounts prove otherwise. Thousands gathered in front of the Stonewall in an act of visibility and excitement, forming kick lines and talking to bystanders about their cause. The streets were filled with singing and joy. No previous demonstration had brought so much public attention. It even earned them on the spot of the front page of the New York Daily News. The demonstration continued in a similar fashion for 5 nights, along with the police arrests and fighting. Quickly after the uprising, groups dedicated to furthering queer rights began to sprout, one of them the first being in 1967, the Gay Liberation Front, or the GLF for short. They started a magazine called The Village Voice, where they put queer voices and writers front and center for the first time in a large publication. Stemming from the Gay Liberation Front came the Lavender Menaces, a group of women dedicated to pushing lesbian rights forward and disrupting misogyny within their own community. The Gay Liberation Front even later stemmed STAR, or Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. They focused on providing livable spaces for the community. This group was led by Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, 2 very prevalent trans activists of their times and catalysts of trans rights in America. Sylvia Rivera was known to point out imbalances within the gay liberation movement. She says it best herself.
"You all tell me to go and hide my tail between my legs. I will not put up with it. I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job. I have lost my apartment for gay liberation. And you all treat me this way? What the f*** wrong with you all? Think about that. I do not believe in a revolution, but you all do. I believe in the gay power. I believe in us getting our rights, or else I would not be out there fighting for our rights.
Her frustration mirrors one that I personally experienced today. A movement to separate the gay community from the transgender community is becoming increasingly popular. Disregards the progress the transgender community has fought for, historically and currently. Sylvia's words perfectly represent the feeling of unequal treatment in places that are supposed to feel safe for trans people. Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day was celebrated for the first time on the one-year anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. It was a large celebration of queer existence and liberation, a parallel of the gay pride parades celebrated all over the world today. When discussing the AIDS crisis with an older lesbian, Kathy Amendola, who lived through the AIDS crisis, she brought up the fact that Stonewall allowed people to be more open and upfront with their identity, making it easier to advocate for the healthcare they needed. What it means today. On May 17th, 2004, the first marriage licenses in America were granted to same-sex couples, while gay marriage becoming federally recognized on the anniversary of Stonewall, June 26, 2015. Without the Stonewall Uprising, it would not have been possible to make this much progress in just over 30 years. The uprising is celebrated every year in the streets through large parades around the world. For the 50th annual Pride celebration in New York City, an estimated 5 million people were in attendance, and it really proves how far and wide the original protesters' message has spread. I see it in my personal life every day. I'm able to wake up every morning and unapologetically be myself. I can present in a way that speaks to who I am without prosecution. I can hold my boyfriend's hand walking down the street, and I'm able to tell the story of queer acceptance and visibility in a public setting just like this one. As of now, queer individuals are seen less and less as of an obscenity. It is becoming less and less acceptable for people to be hateful towards the LGBTQ community. Our love is public, our identities are broadcast, and we refuse to be hidden. But it certainly wasn't always that way. Stonewall started the chain reaction that led us to the progress that we stand on today. The protesters' courage sparked our own. June 27th, in 1969, the police raided the Stonewall Inn. Little did they know, they were in the midst of the frontier of LGBTQ rights. Thank you for watching.